Well, welcome back to the second half of emotionally healthy strategies for developing resilience in life and ministry. The seventh cognitive distortion that I want to look at is that of emotional reasoning. And this is where we take our emotions as gospel truth. If we feel a certain way, well, then that must be reality. And so what we do is we reify them. We make them into a thing, that this is truth rather than our interpretation of reality. So I point us back to, the lenses through which we view people and circumstances and setbacks and failures. And this is where it's just so important. And I think we all realize, that we don't feel feel our way into faith, but yet we do tend to give our feelings a lot of weight. And so we need to remember that feelings are very fallible guides to the truth. And this is where a theology of ministry has been so important to me, that it serves as an anchor or a compass for me in the midst of emotional storms. That what I believe about God and the gospel do not change. And we'll talk more about this, especially in the chapter on reimagining success as faithfulness and looking for fruit, rather than success and achievements and accomplishments, and that our calling is to do everything in love, not to be successful. And that little piece of my theology of ministry did more than anything else to help bring me out of my depression when I was a pastor in my early years of ministry, because one of the deep tributaries of my depression, or flowing into my depression, was the feeling that I was a failure. Well, the eighth cognitive distortion are should statements. And we all could fill in the blank here. Well, I should do this, or I should have done that, or I shouldn't have done that. And this is where we end up shoulding all over ourselves. And we all are way we're way better at that than we really should be. And then there's labeling and mislabeling, where we we'll tell ourselves, well, I am a this, or I am not a, I am, we're really discouraged about ministry. Well, I'm not cut out for ministry. And here you just have to think about how you talk to yourself after failing at a diet or some other important goal, which, again, we all have done that. But to think of, how do we talk about ourselves? I remember, a long time ago, when I ate something that, I didn't want to, I would just tell myself, well, I am a pig, I'm a glutton, or we could tell ourselves, well, I'm a failure, if something doesn't go quite the way that we had anticipated. So again, we need to dispute those thoughts. We need to, debate with ourselves about that. And also, and this is here where we need to think about our self-talk, the way we talk to ourselves. If we talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends. And so we need to befriend ourselves, to be kind to ourselves, to love ourselves, as a neighbor in need of our love every bit as much as someone else, needs love from us. And then the last one we'll look at is personalization. This is where, maybe we take personal responsibility, that isn't even ours to take. That if something goes wrong at church, whether we had anything to do with it or not, that must have been our fault. There's something I didn't do that I should have done. And then Seligman gives this ABCDE model to help us with our emotions. A is for adversity, when there's something, adverse that happens, and then to think of, our beliefs in the wake of that, and then to dispute with that. and then the emotional consequences of those beliefs. It can be depression or anxiety or anger, and then to dispute those thoughts. And then once we get closer to the truth, we learn to reframe and look at things from a more emotionally healthy perspective, to look at things through the hope of the gospel. Then we'll find that there's energy and motivation, a new fresh excitement about things that comes out of this. And just a quick example for me is to thinking about course evaluations, and mostly with undergraduate students, because they'll just say things, that if they're angry about something, they tend to just project that on a professor, and so I wait to. Well, I know that my colleagues and I all, especially those of us who teach general education classes, wait until we're at a really emotionally healthy moment to read those. So that's our adversity, and then belief. It's like, okay, well, what's the evidence for this belief? Is what this student says, is it accurate? Is there an ounce of truth to this? Or is it, they're just tired and emotionally spent at the end of the semester, and so they wanted to scapegoat me. And so then to look at those consequences, it's easy, the emotional consequences, it's easy to get angry and defensive, and then to dispute, those feelings, and then, to get to the point where, I can honestly assess, okay, well, did I miss this? Maybe I could have presented this in a different way, or could make the class a little more engaging this way. And then finally, you get to the energization part. And sometimes it takes a couple days to get to that point, and you can certainly think about how this plays out in your life as well. So you can think back to I think of 5 adverse life events. That might be a little depressing, but just to maybe even take 1 or 2 and identify your beliefs during these events and the effects in your thought and the effects your thoughts had in your body, energy, and relationships with that, and then to go back and reframe those. And I would just say here with this model as well, that the more difficult the situation, the longer it will take to move through this model. But it really is a helpful model, for, the more you do it, the quicker you can move through it. But if it's, more challenging, it might take you several months to work through it. And for me now, it's just kind of second nature. I just kind of work through this, so I'm not thinking A, B, C, D, E. But it's also, say like, if we get a speeding ticket, to just, give ourselves permission to be depressed for a day. Or if we got in a car accident or something, that really is a bummer. That really sucks. The money and, taking it to the body shop and things like that. But, nobody got hurt, nobody died. And, so to reframe it and put it into perspective. And along these lines too, my family, we're kind of, I don't know, sick people in this regard at least. But, if a setback occurs, we will reframe in such a way, we'll just say, well, at least, and so it can be either at least, no one died, or at least, whatever might happen. It could be, many different things, but it just, and it's not, we don't seek to, minimize the things that happen, but again, just to reframe them and put them in perspective. So, maybe you could, try that at least formula in yourself. Well, happiness is really, really important for health. It gives us a stronger immune system. better cardiovascular health, leads to lower levels of cortisol. The cortisol that spikes when we experience stress. Better wound healing. There's the potentially protective effects on telomeres. These are the end caps on DNA, and they can actually read your telomeres these days and kind of find out what your physical age is, due to the effects of stress on them, and then resilience. The happier we are, the more resilient we are, the more ability we have to bounce back from adversity and to absorb stress in our lives. And I just think of Dallas Willard. He said a long time ago in a class I had with him, that if we are genuinely happy and full of joy, we are much better able to resist temptation. When we are sad or depressed or discouraged or stressed, that's when we're most vulnerable to temptation. So, the stronger our overall emotional health can be, again, the more resilient to setback and failure we are. So, here are some emotionally healthy strategies. We can call these emotional means of grace. As we talked before, put on the mind of Christ. Remember that between every stimulus and response, there's a space where we tell ourselves a story. It may not feel like there is a space, but there is, where we can hit the pause button and we can learn to tell a different story than we have been telling ourselves. Later in the class, we'll talk about centering prayer, and this has just been a big help to me in retraining my amygdala so that it hijacks my emotions far less than what it used to. But centering prayer helps us to respond rather than react. It helps us to pause. It helps us to inhabit that space between the stimulus and response. Centering prayer, develops calmness and clarity, kindness, gives us a better perspective. It promotes, neuroplasticity, in our brain. There's greater flexibility to that. And so you think about the brain, the amygdala, it's it's the smoke detector of the brain, and it in contrast to the prefrontal cortex, it's what triggers the fight or flight or freeze response in us. Where the prefrontal cortex, that's, if we can hit that pause button, then we can engage our prefrontal cortex, and we can put on the mind of Christ. We can begin to think hopeful rather than helpless thoughts. Another emotional means of grace is a gratitude journal. And here I remind us of what Seligman said earlier. Depressed people have a ratio of one bad thought to each good thought. Non-depressed people had roughly twice as many good thoughts as bad ones. So the more we can increase good thoughts, the less space there will be for depressed thoughts. Here you might want to write a thank you letter to someone who's been a blessing to you. Think of the ones I've done over the years, and I just feel good about that. I couldn't necessarily do what some have done for me, but I could at least express my gratitude in a letter. And then there's the prayer of examen, which Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, developed this. But it's really pretty simple. Just to ask myself at the end of the day, what am I most grateful for? What am I least grateful for this day? Or where have I seen, heard, tasted, touched, smelled God today? Engaging our five senses, and how they help us to recognize God's presence throughout our day. And I encourage you, if you're going through depression, to see a licensed counselor. There's no shame in that. When I went through my depression, I saw a counselor for a year or so. I have other friends who have seen a counselor for many, many years. It's just part of their rhythm, and it's essential to their emotional well-being. And and there's the big temptation in our day to just throw medication at mental illness. That we just we medicate ourselves to death. And I affirm that medication is really helpful. As I mentioned before, I was on an antidepressant for a couple of years, which was really, really helpful. But at the same time, I just firmly believe that as long as we're on medication, we need to be on we need to see a counselor, because we need to gain insight. We need to be able to understand how did this happen, or how can I help myself think healthier, more hopeful thoughts. And regular exercise, adequate sleep, healthier eating, life-giving relationships, playing hobbies, learning how to manage stress. All of these are important emotional means of grace, and I talk about these in my Happy, Healthy, Holy book. Again, learn to argue with your thoughts. Just don't take them as gospel truth. Ask yourself, what breathes life into me? What brings me joy? What is sustaining me these days? Who breathes life into me? And then to, as much as possible, to engage in those practices and relationships and habits that breathe life into you, because the more life we have in us, the more life we have to give to others. The fuller of joy we are, the more of our joy spills into the lives of others. And for me personally, if I can't answer these questions in the affirmative, then I need to look at how can I boost the joy factor in my life. And then again, just sort of as a preview to our lecture on success and faithfulness, reimagining success, my dissertation mentor at Fuller Seminary, Arch Hart, he has this wonderful book, Coping with Depression in the Ministry and Other Helping Professions. I strongly recommend it, even though it's maybe 20 years old now. So important, and very few other places are these words of wisdom heard. He says, the tendency to allow failure to be destructive is so prevalent in our culture that many of us fail to realize things could be different. On the whole, we are not taught how to use failure constructively, and this cultural hang-up with performance as a criterion for personal well-being has carried over into our Christian communities. Life, including Christian service, was meant to be a trial and error learning process. In order to learn, we have to make mistakes as well as succeed. Failure is for growth. Every failure should help prepare us to avoid the next one. But if we look at failure negatively, the learning process will be inhibited. We will be more likely to judge and condemn ourselves, and depression will be the likely result. And here, you can just, if you're familiar with Carol Dweck and her research on adversity and failure, you'll see how Arch sort of anticipates her. But basically, she says much of the same thing. That we all learn through failure. It would be great if we didn't. I try to learn as much as I can from the failures of others, but it seems I learn a whole lot more from my own failures, than I do that of others. Another emotional means of grace is spend time in creation. There's just something life-giving about being outside in God's creation, among rivers and streams and lakes and birds and trees and flowers. And for me, it's one of those practices that breathes life into me and it sustains me. And this is why whenever I can, I get out backpacking throughout the year, and I have different places I go depending on this time of year. If it's you know as in spring break, I go to Hell's Canyon here in Idaho, which is it's warmer in there than anywhere else, so I can go backpacking in March, or go to Utah in May before it heats up down there, and it's still relatively cool here, and there's still snow up in the high country, and then in July, then I can go up into the high country here in Idaho, or hike on the Colorado Trail in Colorado. Wendell Berry, again, Eugene Peterson, in The Unpredictable Plant and others of his writings, first introduced me to him, and I really encourage you to check out his poetry and his other books. But he says, when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. So just by way of reminder, here's another little model here for CBT therapy. Our thoughts and feelings create behavior. Behavior reinforces our thoughts. Here's another way, catch, check, change. So catch yourself in the act of thinking, helpless, hopeless thoughts. Check them, debate, dispute them, and then change them. Get in there and tweak with them. What's a more accurate way to think and perceive this obstacle, failure, or setback in your life? And then finally, here are the discussion board questions. Evaluate which of these 10 cognitive distortions to which you may be most susceptible, and what you have done, maybe what you will do to begin changing those, or to share an example of a false story you've told yourself and how you changed your story. And then to evaluate the relationship of theology and psychology from a spiritual formation perspective. Why is psychology important for spiritual formation? What kind of a holistic theology can we develop so that we can integrate theology and psychology in such a way that it leads to healthier and happier and holier lives? So anyway, I knew that this lecture would kind of run long. It's been something that kind of brewing in me for a while, and in my next book I'll have at least one chapter, maybe two, like this lecture in this area, because I just think it's so important, and we hear so little teaching about it in the church. Well, God bless you, and we will see you in class.